Hi, my name is Gino, the president of Speed Tribe Sakura. I haven't made a video in a very long time, and so I decided it was time to make one that's been long overdue and on the back of my mind for a while. As you may know, I was the owner of a 2019 Toyota 86 that I affectionately named Komi-San, after the main character of my then favorite manga series. As some of you may know, I lost Komi-San in October of 2021 due to my own driver error. A driver error that cost me my car. Now, as is tradition with vehicles lost within Speed Tribe, a tribute comes in due time. This time though, I want to try something out a little different than just pics of the car and some music in the background. You see, the truth is, at the time of my ownership, I never truly enjoyed the 86. It was just another car to me, and it didn't seem to have the soul of the other cars I owned. I treated it like it was disposable and, well, as the saying goes, you don't know what you have until you don't have it. I miss the car dearly, and I wish I had more time to truly grow toward the car and let it truly become a part of me, as I have the other cars that I own. As a disclaimer, this won't entirely be about my car more than it is about my life during my ownership. This car went through a lot with me, and I feel this is the best send-off I could give it. My stories, accompanied by the music I ever so loved at the time. Komi-san forever. My 86 was purchased for me in May of 2019 at the age of 18 as a high school graduation present and a college car. At the time, I was moving out of state to attend UTI in Phoenix starting September of that year. At the time, I didn't know exactly what I had wanted, as I had the option. I wanted something manual, reliable, and from a brand I knew and trusted. The FK8 Civic Type R, ND Miata, and the upcoming A90 Supra were all options. As the Supra wasn't out yet, and it was already announced at the time that it wouldn't come in stick, it was out of question. Not to mention how awful the dealer markups would have been. A Miata was a car I had always wanted, but the ND's styling strayed very far from the NA I had longed for when I was 14. It was out. The FK8 Civic Type R was another car I had always wanted, but at the time I was fiending for something with the power going to the rear wheels. It was again out. Now, Toyota is a brand that I grew up with my whole life. My first car was an IS300, my mom had a Sequoia, my aunts and uncles had assortments of Siennas, 4Runners, Sequoias, Tundras, Celicas, Corollas, and many more. The choice was obvious, and before I even knew it, I was on my way to the dealer in a Camry my dad had given me to use as trade-in value as, at the time, he couldn't be behind the wheel. By before I knew it, I really mean it. I knew I was going to be getting a new car before my final days in high school ended, but I didn't realize how soon it would be. At the time, I was with some friends at a junkyard looking for spare parts for one of their cars. I got a text from my mom and a call from my dad to let me know what was happening, and we wrapped up with what we could and got out of there. I arrived at the dealership with my very temporary Camry XSE, and the process of trading it in began. Now, for context, I didn't just buy some random 86 I picked out right then and there. You see, my dad had a brand new 2013 FRS pretty much immediately after they were released. It was an asphalt gray 6-speed that was fairly base spec, but as a then 12-year-old, it was such a cool car to see after being in and around Toyotas for so long at that point. You wouldn't believe what the dealer had the day before I went to get the car. An asphalt gray 6-speed 8.6, spec'd with a TRD air filter, TRD wheels, and a TRD catback. I was sold. I was there with another friend the first day I saw the car. He had a TE72 Corolla that got us both super into Toyotas, more than ever before. The whole scene seems so similar to that one ad Toyota Japan released with two geeky guys freaking out over the other's AE86. Back to the purchase process, things got a little funny. The whole transaction was smooth, but there was one problem. A major one. I couldn't drive stick at the time. Yeah. I remember it like it was the other day. I got into the car to leave the dealer right there in the delivery bay, and I stalled it in front of not one, but two families purchasing, very humbly, a Tacoma and Camry respectively. Not to mention the numerous salespeople watching and the sales manager who sold us the car himself. One of the most embarrassing moments of my entire 21 years of life would be an understatement. However, they called the porter up to drive the car home for us, and we were shuttled home. You know, working at a dealership now, doing the same job as those guys were doing, I can see how much of a pain in the ass that probably was. And if somehow that shuttle driver and porter are watching this, I'm very sorry. Moving on, I remember everything from after those events on that night vividly. I remember getting home and meeting with my friend who went to look at the car with me to grab some food. Now, he was also my roommate at the time, so it was hard to keep it a secret. After the car had been dropped off, my mom and I were both starving, so we went to Panda Express to grab a meal. At that point, I told my buddy to meet with us after he got off work so he could, quote-unquote, get food with us. I let my mom know that she could go home and I would ride back with him, and so I did. I got in, I hinted at it very subtly. He asked what I meant. I pulled out the keys and excitement filled this little 82 Corolla more than it probably ever has before. Long story short, I spent the rest of the night learning how to drive stick. I barely made it to the empty parking lot that I was practicing in, but alas, I did. We limped to McDonald's down the streets at 2 a.m., and at that point I was getting the hang of it a bit better, maybe 70% of the way there. You see, the 86 was more or less a dream car for me, so I didn't want to give up on learning just yet, and within 2 weeks, after countless stalls in public, almost rolling into classmates after school, and many hard starts home, I had the method down. Over the next few months, I spent a lot of time in the car, mainly getting used to it, but more or less experiencing life. Life was changing at this point. High school graduation had come and gone, and many faces I knew and came to be familiar with all disappeared. My greatest friends I had met in high school were still around, but they were getting ready for their college years, as was I. We all decided it was time to make the most of our summer, our last summer before college strangled us all away from each other. We ate out a lot. We hung out a lot. We drove around a lot. Mind you, gas was only $2.90 max at this point in time. It was wonderful, and a time of my life I will never forget. I grew closer to the people I didn't think I would, and life was sunny, warm, and ever so melancholic. All behind the wheel of my Komi-San. It was around this time as well that I had gathered with 3 other friends and really put Speed Tribe Sakura into fruition. You see, we had set it up in 2018, but it really didn't get the ball rolling until the year after. We recruited a few original members, most of whom were our said high school friends, and it was set. We had lots of fun, and being in the car scene is something that, at the time, I wish I had become a part of sooner. Well, the summer came, and the summer went. My roommate who went to check out the 86 with me initially had shipped off to boot camp for the Navy. My friends started college, and I had one last big trip to Kansas with some, at the time, good friends of mine. For me, it was time to go. And go I did. To Arizona. UTI, the reason I was there, the whole reason I had received the car in the first place. At first, I was scared. I always have been a sensitive and emotional person, so to up and leave the familiar place I had lived in for nearly 20 years of my life was hard. New furniture, new bed, new room. It was a shock. Luckily, I wasn't alone in this move, as I had opted to room with one of my high school classmates who was another good friend of mine and was going to UTI's motorcycle sister school, MMI. I think both of us were excited to be there in Phoenix, but I don't think either of us truly considered to be a second home. It was more or less just, well, temporary housing. We wanted to get school done and get out. Regarding the 8-6, I had driven it down following my mom's Sequoia, filled with a bunch of my things. I got pretty much zero sleep the night before out of nervousness, so I was scared I might fall asleep, but both myself and the car did wonderfully. On the first day of school at UTI, I was seriously terrified. Being someone who's always suffered one form of anxiety to another, alongside ADD, talking to new people was never an easy task to handle for me. However, past my first class, which I ended up becoming student of the course on, I ended up slowly warming up to the school, students, and the teachers. Into my second class, roughly 3 weeks into my move, I had more or less come to accept that I wouldn't be back home for a while. But that's where my first new friends at UTI came in. I vividly remember it. I pulled up to school and parked in the 8-6, and up came this primered EJ6 Civic sedan with a couple of dudes chilling inside. They parked next to me, and one immediately got out and excitedly complimented my Komi-San, please drive safe peeker. The other, the driver, got out and complimented my car. It was set. Turns out the driver was in my next class, and the passenger had the same class with a different teacher. It was their first class at UTI. During this whole time, the 8-6 sort of served as just a catalyst for conversation. I was pretty much the only one at school who had one at the time, so when people saw it, they would immediately say something about it. Something I appreciated and understood, but not something I particularly fawned over at the time. Back to the other two, they eventually became Speed Tribe Sakura's first couple of short-lived Arizona members, alongside some other friends who had also moved to Arizona with me from the same high school. This chapter of life is where I think the 8-6, if it could have spoken, would say it had the most fun. The car loved it out there, and I could tell. Hate to get stereotypical, but I've always believed cars have had some sort of spiritual aspect to them. Though most would disagree, of course. Life was so different for both me and the 8-6 than it was back in Vegas. Most of the miles put on the car were in fact from cruising with these guys, driving to and from Arizona to Vegas, and from aimlessly driving around Phoenix and exploring with my roommates. There was even a sense of love and thrill, a single date with a girl I met at school. It was a complicated situation, that one. For our first and only date, we went up to the mountain pass and literally just raced. Like, I'm not even joking, the date was literally just going up to the toge and fucking racing. Yeah, lots of fun. I bet you thought it was gonna be something dirty though, huh? Anyway, it didn't last long, and she dropped out while I stayed back, and I moved on. Speaking of the toge though, in this car, in this place, is where I first got my introduction on how to truly drive. I'm no professional, don't get me wrong, but these roads, with the people I ran with, was something you'd have to see to believe. Guys my age and a little older with B-swapped Civic hatches, fully kitted out Miatas, RSX Type S's, and even a grippy, autocross prepped 6-speed Elantra Sport that I only ever saw in the past once. It was my dream come true, and the guys were really helpful in teaching me how to handle the pass and not to surpass my limits. They were very respectful, and I wish I had taken the time to get to know them more, honestly. Give it about 4 more months, however, and I was starting to get burnt out. School was nothing but stress. I was consistently 2nd to 3rd place in my classes, but at the cost of my mental health. I started to sort of give up on school. Now don't worry, I was having tons of fun attending meets, cruising, running the toge, and aimlessly driving around with my friends in the 8-6. But something started to become evident. I seriously missed home. At this point, my roommate who was attending MMI had left school to pursue full-time work in Phoenix, and another good friend from school moved into our apartment after dropping out of the school's awful housing program. Come to the beginning of the catastrophic disease that shut everything down in late 2020 to early 21, the school's curriculum got too muddied with bad preparation and what I thought was extremely poorly executed distance learning, if you could even call it that. It was here where I really started to give up. I ended up repeating a class, my first time ever doing so, and after that, I had had it. I was starting to get on pretty bad terms with another couple of classmates who had moved from Vegas for pretty ridiculous reasons, and the constant stress was too much to handle. So I said goodbye to Phoenix, my roommates, and UTI. I packed up the 8.6, drove back home, and went back once more with my mom Sequoia with 2 friends to pick up my stuff. That was it. Once I got back home, relief set in. I felt free. Me and my car had what I would call a life-changing journey. Phoenix truly did help me change for the better. My driving had improved, and I had improved as a person. What didn't improve, however, was the car itself, ironically. It was still just a pretty much stock 8.6 with the exception of an exhaust and wheels. And so, within a few days of coming back, I had installed TRD lowering springs I had ordered in Arizona. Something I'd wanted to do for a while, but never got the chance to do since I lived in an apartment complex. One thing I had realized I came to love was how absolutely easy the 8.6 was to work on. I fully believe it's one of the very few cars left that are built for the enthusiast. Everything was so easy to reach, easy to set up, and easy to modify. Not a single complaint about working on the ZN6 platform. One thing I had also come to realize starting in Arizona was my love for my car club. This, Speed Tribe Sakura. What you're all here on this channel for. As I said before, being a part of the car community earlier was something I wish I had gone through with doing. I've met some of the most amazing people I've ever met through this hobby, and that statement still holds true to this day. Speed Tribe was finally able to reach its full potential now that I had returned to Vegas. I knew what I had wanted to do with it, and to this day I still love every second I get to run this club filled with wonderful and beautiful people. The 8.6 in Speed Tribe was, as it was in Arizona, a catalyst for conversation, but now I had come to realize what that had really meant. People loved the car. People knew me for the car, and I was okay with that. The car was finally taking on the form that I had wanted it to, too. I installed a set of Tomei unequal length headers and put on a tune from an OFT V2 tablet to make the check engine light go away, and to liven up the torque curve as well. As everyone says about these cars, it really helps out a lot. HKS Hypermax 4 GT coilovers were next, and I was content with where it was for the time being. The sound, the ride, the enjoyment of people riding with me, that's what I loved about this car. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it was full of not spirit or passion like my older vehicles, but love. That car loved where it was. The members of my club, their cars, the photos we took, the people I took on dates, the people I hung out with after my D&D sessions. The car was loved, and it loved back. However, what I think is evident to myself now is that I don't think I loved it back enough. The events you're hearing here are viewed from a retrospective. At the time, I didn't know what I had. I had been through so much good and bad with the car that I had let it distract me in how I drove it. It was a pretty abused car, in all honesty. Nearly 30,000 miles were on it at this point, and while most of it being highway driving to and from Phoenix, I don't think I remember a single time where I didn't step on the gas to do a pull all the way to Redline while driving it. However, through it all, the car never stopped showing me and everyone around it the love that it could give. It started up every time, it responded well to everything I did to it, and I realize now that it was always something fun to drive, something with plenty of passion and spirit. On the evening of October 4th, I was traveling with some friends in my 1992 Honda Civic, a recent acquisition at the time. I had dropped them off and gone to run my usual route home, and all of a sudden my battery light came on. The car started to lose power and my lights were dimming. I still, however, made it home, albeit barely. It was then that I realized one of my friends had dropped his keys on the floor. I called him up, let him know what happened, and headed on the way to his house in the 86. Everything went smoothly up to that point, and so I headed back home. Very close to my house is a left-hand corner that I always take at speed in the 86 because it slides out a bit when I take it. I always thought nothing of it, but great fun. That night, however, was different. By this point, it was 2 a.m., October 5th. I was going into the corner with traction control off and got into a larger skid than I had ever had before. I couldn't correct in time and hopped an island, slamming into a one-way sign with my front right fender. It happened in a flash. The passenger curtain airbags went off, the dust settled, and I realized what had happened. I exited the car and found the sign lodged underneath the fender, with it crushed inward maybe about 6 inches. I didn't feel anything until the distress hit. It felt helpless. This was the first time I had ever crashed a car. It didn't feel real. It felt like a nightmare. 2 passers-by stopped to help, one on a Harley and another in an EJ6 Honda Civic sedan. Almost poetic, the latter, isn't it? To them, I am eternally grateful. I called my mom, and the whole situation got settled. I drove the car home, and something had obviously happened to the exhaust due to the much louder noise. I couldn't sleep that night, and the next morning I went out to a rainy day. Overcast and wet. Gray skies, blank emotion. I stood outside in the rain, looking what I had done, and I cried. I knew immediately what would happen. Everyone tried to comfort me, and to them again, I am forever grateful. However, I already knew the damage was irreparable. Days later, a tow truck came to pick up the car to a body shop for the insurance company to inspect it. Sure enough, they had totaled Komi-San. The sign that I had hit was in a concrete island, and so a stub base was used to keep it up in the concrete. That stub had cut into the frame and the exhaust of the car after I had knocked it over. This meant both floorboards and the catalytic converter back needed to be replaced, something an insurance company would obviously prefer not to do. And so it was decided. Komi-san would be leaving me. In what is blistering cold for Las Vegas, I called some friends over in November to help me out in reverting the car back to stock. This meant taking my coilovers off and replacing them back with my stock strut and TRD spring setup and putting my original headers back on. There were many that came by to help. Eki, Wyatt, Jamie, Kino, Colby, Eric, Randy. Thank you all. You all have no clue how much it meant for me for you guys to be there, helping me make sure that she was ready to go. After everything was done, I went upstairs to write a note to the next owner. I put it inside the owner's manual and shed my final tears for Komi-san. The next day, I took her to her last car meet, where those close to me were able to say their final goodbyes. And the day after that, a very wonderful tow truck driver who worked with his 5 to 6 year old son loaded the car onto the truck, and Komi-san was gone. After a couple of months, the car sold on Copart and went to a rebuilder, and guess where? Arizona. Looks like things came full circle. Sometime within the next month or two afterward, she sold, and I haven't seen her since. Through love, heartbreak, gain, and loss, Komi-san was there for me at that time in my life, and for that I am forever thankful. that car, I say sayonara and thank you.
私を始められないから今度こそちゃんとさよなら